Point 7, this is the harbor depth maintenance program. Review. A lot of work went into this report, and I thank Brent for the time and effort that went into it. Do you have any comments you want to make prior to council having a discussion on this?
I don't think so. I think it's, you can say it's a long report. There's a lot of little complicated issues and nuance. So I'd be happy to take any questions council has throughout the discussion.
Okay. Questions on this report? There's some options at the end there. Councillor Russell, stand up first.
Yeah, I'd really like to thank Brent. I remember Councillor Scott and I were assigned to Brent, and we didn't do a lot of work. Mr. Mayor, I'll admit, he's as good as we know. He kept us informed and everything, and then he told us that he was going to put this comprehensive report together, and he's done an excellent job. I just think there's one thing that would make this go further. We had our presentation tonight. I had a talk with Brent this morning about this, and I think what we kind of came to the conclusion between the two of us that probably this is the opportune time to start a working group at both ends. Not both ends, but both rivers. Both ends. It's not both ends of a river. It's a similar river that's been cut off 2 different times. But the reality is this is where you've got the nuances, and this is a more open report than some of the ones I've seen in the past discussing this issue, because we've only gone at it from an ice jam point of view. What he's going to is that larger picture, which is the idea of how are we going to fund this long term. And to fund it long term, we have to have discussions with the users. We have to represent the ratepayers on this issue, and we have to look at it in I call a holistic way. And until we do that and do it with our partners, right, what we're going to do is we're going to make, as I figure, decisions on this that are reactive. That $100,000 in the fall was reactive. I'll be very blunt about it. It was reactive. I don't think the decisions we make after that $100,000 should be reactive. They should be based on facts, and it should be with input from the public. So that's what I want to say on it. I think we need to strike 2 working groups, Grand Bend and Port Franks, with the user groups, the sailing clubs, the yachting clubs, the marinas, and the residences who have also dockage space on both of those rivers. So that's what I would like to say.
Before we get into this, is an omnibus report. There are so many decisions to be made in this report. I don't think there's one motion on this report. I agree 100%. I think this is the opportunity to bring the partners to the table and say, how are we going to work on this? Because there's a lot of partners involved with this, and it's huge for our economic, stability up in these areas. I guess the question I have is, it's a chicken and egg thing. Do you put a working group together first to address this? These are budgetary implications. I think this council's got to make some budgetary decisions.
I would agree that there's, there is some immediacy to the decision making. Councilor Russell and I did discuss today that having a working group and bringing in new people to get fresh ideas of how to maintain the river and improve our program is very important. But when we're considering the 2013 boating season, if there's changes or improvements that need to be made, I think that decision does need to be made in advance of a consultation. You're right, it's chicken and egg.
Staff is in contact with these user groups. Staff can be in contact with any program that you put together. The options here, the contract amendment with Magor Works and the new equipment that they have, those types of agreements, we have to get working on that for dredging approvals and those types of things sooner rather than later. My concern with the working group is it's another committee that has to advertise their meetings and has to have everything done and secretarial work and everything else dealing with them. I guess my thoughts are staff can do this work, staff can still communicate, and the groups can still communicate with their counselors, but it can go back here and move forward faster. Working groups can be established, but for this season, I don't know that we have time to set up those working groups.
That was actually the second point to my question I didn't get to, but that's okay. The second point in the question was, are any of these expenditures reflected right now in our proposed operating budget?
No, none of the new changes are. So the current operating budget reflects the current program.
Okay,
So if there's any changes to be made that have financial impacts, that would be in addition to the current draft budget.
yeah, I guess that's the concern I have, is that, there are some really big considerations in here, and I don't know if tonight is, the night to get into this. I think this needs really good discussion at the budget meeting on its own, and we've got to really look at this and think about it. And I looked at it today, and I don't know, I don't have any answers, I don't have, it's contingent on resources.
Councillor Scott. Councillor Scott.
The report is an amazing report. Brent, you did a great job. I mean, I sat and read it. I gave it to my husband to read because he likes this type of thing, and he was like, wow. So we've done something, but there are two things that I'm very concerned about. One, if we don't do something about putting a working group together now, we'll be in the same boat we were with the Economic Development Task Force. And that's 6 months down the road, we'll still be talking about it. So I don't believe that necessarily a working group can do a lot for 2013 perhaps, but I also believe that a working group has to start thinking ahead for 2014, or we're going to be in the same boat come next January. So I think a working group is actually a priority. It doesn't necessarily solve the solution for 2013, but it does start to put together some people in place that we can start to look at. Maybe some partnerships will come out of this. If we don't get a bunch of groups together for people to understand how the costs of each of these things are going to be. I mean, the ice management study, I think, was $1.4 million, and there's no guarantees that that works. This is different because this is the summer uses of this stuff. So we're looking at two different things already with it. So I think we have to put together the concept of a working group now, and I think we need to then have a Tuesday discussion where we spend nothing talking about this before we finalize our budget on what we can be willing to spend or not spend, because this is either we're going to do it or we're going to ignore it. And then when we ignore it, we end up having people come forward to us and say to us, but you're doing this and this, there's no tourism, da-da-da-da. We won't have a boat on the river if we don't do something and soon. I've already had operators calling to ask me what the potential problem or what the potential is for this year. Can they rent their docks out? I mean, is there any point? So I have people already calling me and asking that, and this is January, so they're obviously getting that. I think we need to go back to maybe where John and I were put on a committee with Brent, and maybe we need to sit down with Brent and talk about some of the stuff that you've put in here, and then talk about a working group, what it is that you need from a working group, start on that part of it at least, and then come back to council with what a working group, what we need to do with it, and we could do that in the next thing. But if we ignore this, or we don't do something positive with this now, we're gonna be in the same boat we are next year discussing the same thing. It's like dogs running on the beach, we hear that all the time, we can't find a solution. But if we don't start to look for a solution, we're not ever gonna have a chance to have one.
I'm not suggesting that we don't do anything with this. I'm suggesting that council move forward and either update the contract to have the piece of equipment to do what needs to be done this year. But the other part of that is the working group looking at the long-term development and redevelopment, whether it be a safe harbor in Grand Bend that is recognized, or whether there's additions to both marinas. That's the thing I see with the working group. I see the local, this year, solution being staff, what do we need to do to keep this operation going, and to put that in place through a council decision, which will be much quicker. If the working group is formed, it needs to be a long-term, or it needs to be the terms of reference need to be defined, whether it's a working group for a 5-year plan, or what, that part of it. Councillor Underwood.
Yeah, I have two things. One is for the report exactly known as towards the working group or groups. Councillor Russell, we'll start with the working group. Councillor Russell mentioned 2 different groups. Maybe would that be the best way through you to Brent? Would you prefer to have 2 separate working groups, or would you like to make this into one omnibus solution, get experts who are all boaters from both areas? Like in one working group, what would be the most effective? In my mind, it would be